Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, HubSpot Nation. Welcome to a special edition of Let's Build, where we're building Content Hub with Ankur Gupta today. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Long time listener, first time caller. I think your first Let's Build might have been like one of my products too, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. HubSpot memberships.
Back in the day.
Back back almost a year ago now. Crazy to think about. Thank you for remembering, and we appreciate you, coming out today. I couldn't resist inviting you because this is one of those topics we're going to be unboxing podcast importing today, which I've done a HubSpot podcasts, just general unboxing. But when I saw your video, it's one of those things where it's like it's sitting there in the platform and you're like, I know I could probably get value out of this thing. But for some reason, I haven't gotten into it yet and still using other tool sets. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to just give it a run through and then, learn what I may or may not be missing throughout the
Absolutely.
process.
Yeah, let's give it a run, and then I can show you what to do next with that podcast once you've gotten it into HubSpot. This has been probably our most requested feature ever since we launched podcast a year ago, which is, hey, I'm using another hosting provider and I need a way to get that into HubSpot. There's some manual ways. You download all the episodes, upload them all up, but if you're producing content on the regular, that's not scalable. That's not going to work for you. And I'm glad to get this into the hands of customers. It's in beta today, so sign up on your product updates page and test it out. But we'll be doing it live, so I'm excited to finally get your podcast into HubSpot.
Yes, indeed. Appreciate your willingness to do this live. That's for sure. Always the most fun. And I haven't done this yet, just for everybody's um, knowledge. Share my screen. And this was not planned, but this is me testing it out before, where I'd done like one episode. We didn't have the import capabilities yet. And I was just saying, hey, what if I have an episode already? Um, and we'll see what it looks like. But now we have the import option,
Oh yeah.
which if we go up here, podcast show, I'm going to click import a podcast show. And again, we did, activate the public beta over in the product update screen to get that to show up. So now all we need is an RSS feed URL and got one of those at the ready. Got Let's Build AI Skills Daily. Had a blast with George B. Thomas and Nico uh, in Q4, hitting it every day. It was a lot, but it was a lot of fun as well.
Three of
And
the greats. Yeah.
yeah, we're coming back. It's going to be weekly, but next week I think we're going to be coming back with that show. So, what better time than to start getting it into HubSpot? So, copy the RSS feed here and paste it into here. And I've got options to auto create a new show from RSS. Uh, and that's what I want to do. So I could actually import it into
Yeah.
another one I've already done.
So if you want to consolidate a few different podcast shows that you have into just one RSS feed, maybe you've already gotten started getting new content into HubSpot, but you want to get your old content into our platform, whatever it might be, we want to give you the optionality. We think most people will probably end up creating new RSS feeds, but for whatever reason, if you want to just import your episodes, we want to make that easy too.
Yeah, no, I like that flexibility for sure. Because there's a lot of that, and I can't imagine how hard it is on the product side. Like so much of this is like, are we serving new
Yeah.
customers? Or what about all our old customers? And like, what if they're already doing this? What if not?
It's
Um,
striking that balance between extensibility and just making it fast and easy. Fast and easy is our North Star, but we know there are folks that have had long lives and long businesses before they even adopted HubSpot in the first place. So we want to make sure that we are also making the process easy for them. So you'll see there's 49 episodes. Importing, you don't need to stay on the screen. It will happen asynchronously. So if you want to shoot out a few emails, grab a workout, it'll happen a lot faster than you're able to work out. But whatever you want to do on the side, um, it'll just happen in the background. So you see right now that the podcast import is in progress. Um, and if you actually go into the podcast app and you go to you'll see the show is now there. If you're like me and you're just like constantly monitoring what's happening, you can see the episodes slowly trickle in. Um, so we can take a look at that. Now, I will say this is beta software, so whatever happens live, and we'll roll with the punches. So let's take a look.
Oh, and we already have it here. I'll just say, like, first of all, like how quickly it told me there were 49 episodes. Like, I've been curious how many we actually did. I didn't have that number in my head. So that was nice, like right away. Uh, so we'll click on
Look at that. In just a matter of, I don't even think it's been a minute. We have imported a decent chunk of your episodes. It's still processing in the background. If you refresh the page, you might see more episodes show up. You might see it paginate. Um, Now, one cool thing I want to show you and make sure that we cover while we're on air is if you don't mind hitting that edit columns button for me.
our favorite button in HubSpot, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Why don't we take a look at the publish date? So just on the left-hand side, yeah. And
Yeah.
now this is
Wow.
important. We are retaining your publish date. So we are backdating back to when that episode first went out. It's not, not everything is going to be published on February 7th. We retain that original date. We make sure that people know that you have a history, that you're not just new to this scene and putting 49 episodes out on one single day.
That's awesome. Like retention like that is definitely so important. We definitely have more episodes showing up. Do you know how it's maybe selecting which ones come and which ones don't?
So we just run down the list. So everything will come in. Uh, there are some checks and balances we do have on the back end. Um, our platform is built for small businesses, so there are features that some more consumer platforms have that we don't think are as relevant. A big one is dynamic ad insertion. So if you have ads in your podcast, we don't typically see a lot of B2B podcasters are trying to monetize their content. They're just trying to get their message out, build an audience, do some business development, honestly. So that's not a feature that we support on our platform, at least today. Um, but what we
George asked me about that one specifically uh, when I told him I was going to have a conversation with you.
if he is
So
doing dynamic ad insertions and he has different feelings about it, I would invite the conversation. I can be convinced otherwise. Um,
he will try to convince you
Fair
for
enough.
sure. Um, yeah,
But
no, I'm on the side, especially as we speak about this podcast. I don't. Uh, I think anybody putting effort into ads innovation right now, especially on the horizon of like maybe you have to create agent focused ads, like, and
yeah,
they're gonna need a completely different kind of ad
sure.
if they even need ads like at all. Uh, it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point. I haven't thought of it from that angle necessarily. Typically when I do encounter the typical B2B marketer who's doing ads, it's usually just hey, we have this event coming up. Maybe it's HubSpot who's trying to advertise inbound and marketing against the grain or something of that sort. But it's interesting to think of it from the lens of like an agent or some sort of crawler that is now interpreting the ad as like an additional piece of information when maybe recommending the podcast on an AI search summary or using it as an input to a larger content creation effort. The one thing I do want to emphasize though is even if you have ads on your podcast, that doesn't we'll still import the podcast for you. We there are very few exceptions where we won't import the podcast, even if there is a specific piece of metadata that we don't support or a specific feature we don't support. Really, the only hard rule we have is we focus on MP3s because that is the file format that every single podcast distributor that we're aware of, at least, adopts. Sometimes we will have AAC files and other things, but we're focused on breadth.
Okay, just coming back to look at the other property options here. I am interested in duration. I think this was probably the most consistent set of episodes I've ever done as far as trying to stick to a 30-minute show. Um, so I'm gonna, yeah, we'll just use cool stuff while we're doing this. Freeze columns.
Freeze frames are always appreciated.
Yeah.
So your
Although
duration
this has
is
always been something not super enjoyable with HubSpot is not being able to do this until I scroll down.
sure.
Um, but we have, okay.
It might take a moment to load. We are importing your podcast for the first time, so there might be some back processing we need to do. Um,
Yep.
but like I mentioned before, beta software. As we find bugs, we'll deal with bugs.
Yep. So that is intended to come over on
Yeah.
import.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. That makes sense. All right. And we get to highlight maybe some missing metadata or stuff that has maybe happened along the way on our side too. Um, but this, I mean, nitpicking aside, like,
Well, let's also go to show settings. Let's. It's not just the episodes we're importing; it's everything about your show. So right off the bat, we had the title. That's the easy one, but we got your description. If you scroll down a bit, if you have a cover image, we'll bring that in as well. Yep, there we go. So we are all in on like just bringing podcast owner email. It looks like George was the one who started this. Yeah, entrepreneurship. Let's see what else. I'm assuming technology might be the next bucket that you've hit.
yeah.
Ah, yeah,
Yep.
there it is. Technology.
You have this list memorized, sir?
When you start working with a tool long enough, you start
Yeah.
you generate an unhealthy amount, as you know, as a HubSpot pro, an unhealthy amount of knowledge about just how the platform works and all of the
Yeah.
things
And
that folks are
and I'm
doing.
sure it's like there's probably like 10 that are chosen total in this huge list that like 90% of HubSpot
When it comes
users
to
are.
B2B, yeah, you don't find as
Yeah.
many B2B companies necessarily throwing out like nature or arts as like topics. Not that
Right.
they don't, but it's not as common.
Yep. Um, okay. Wow, that's very cool. Um, Also makes it super easy as we go to the weekly mode. We'll be able to update things there if we need to update like
Exactly. And
show
and we
description and stuff.
also not a feature that we're covering right now, but as you go to a more regular cadence, if you ever want to schedule that episode, maybe you want to hit Tuesday at 5 a.m. because that's when you get the most listeners. That's when it shows up in everyone's respective podcast distribution network in the morning. We support that too. We've added a lot of functionality really to make the HubSpot podcasting app not just good for new podcasters, but existing ones. In fact, some other things we've added in the last couple of months is the ability to remix a podcast. We know that podcasts are the richest source of content. So you should be able to turn that into a blog or a social post if you need to. So we now have podcast input nodes as well as output nodes if that's something of interest, supported on our platform.
Okay. Oh man, so much to think about there. Uh, I love, and that's where we're getting close. As profoundly just launched like the content. I hope that we can, like, one of the goals is to take the knowledge sharing that uh, I was able to accomplish with a bunch of other co-hosts last year and really just like share, like take sharing of expertise to a new level. And obviously, the one thing I was challenging last year is my whole point is like if you don't create the show, then you never get to the repurposing. So focus on creating the original content first, and then never, for me, since it was just me in most cases, never get to
Sure.
step two, which is repurposing and clipping up and starting to play with that. So I'm really excited to dig into.
It's a really good point
Um,
because most podcasts tend to fail. Maybe if they can get to episode 3, that's the huge drop off point. That third episode is where a lot of people just aren't able to keep up with the pace.
Only three now.
Yeah, a lot of the
Wow.
advice I give folks is, focus on one. You can never have too short a pipeline of guests coming in. You can never stop asking folks. You can there's There's never a good stopping point. You always want more. The other thing is maybe produce that first month of episodes, have them ready to go, ready to publish, and have them scheduled and queued. So that way you can really consistently push out that content. Seasonality is another thing that some folks might want to think about. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to say, hey, we've just put out 20 great pieces of content. We'll be back with season 2 or season 4 or 6 or whatever it is in a few months. But it's keeping up with the pace. That's the biggest downfall for many aspiring podcasters.
Yeah. No, it's definitely it's that's where I think it's just like there's so many connotations just by using the word podcast, right? Like I've always been inspired by the way that Chris Walker created his show back in 2020, right as the pandemic was hitting.
Mm.
Like he has, and he's continued to do that. Like any interviews you're doing on other shows, solo shows that you do, like live streams that you do once a week, or
Yeah.
community shows, like it all is in that podcast. And it's another way to get to content. So I'm very curious to like play with this. And now that the import is available, like seeing if it makes sense to really consolidate um, kind of under a sub brand or theme, and then just have different, themed content within the same like podcast channel. Um,
It, it's interesting that you bring up just the content, like what does even a podcast mean anymore? Because 10 years ago, Apple was the dominant player in podcasts, and today, by and large, most podcasts are consumed on YouTube, and it's a form of a video medium, and that's been a very interesting shift in the dynamic. Like podcasts aren't just something that's consumed on the way to work or during a workout. It's something that people are watching. They're sitting at their desks, or maybe they're lying down with their iPad and consuming the content. I think if we take it even a step further, like is a podcast necessarily meant to go out to the larger public? We've talked with folks who do a lot of internal podcasting. This is typically where the AI, like text to speech, comes into play. You'll have people who want to let their sales reps know about the latest products that they've launched. So they'll do a weekly podcast and they'll use AI text to speech to automate that type of experience. If you have like long ebooks, hundreds of pages, breaking that up into chapters using text to speech. There's so many things that fall under the category of podcasts that it's probably a never ending rabbit hole, to be honest.
yeah, and I'm kind of that way with digital content, like in general, just because the only label I've given my stuff is either LinkedIn Live, so people can immediately understand like the format it's coming
Yeah.
in, or show, right? Like, but I've had so I that's the what I've assigned to the Let's Build series. Like this one's different because we took a different approach as far as like, George did some work to make sure it was getting onto Transistor, and it's definitely the most highly produced content I did last year. But for everything else, it's a show, and I've had them called webinars, podcasts, webcasts, streams, like all of the things, right? And
Yeah.
that's where I don't really we can't control that part, right? And if you choose not to, like it changes the approach of the show, because if I understand that, I know that some people are just going to listen, and some people watch, right? And some people might be watching on their desktop, but it's behind everything else and they're just listening to it while they
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where we get caught up in all the metrics around watch time and views. And like at the end of the day, like so much of it's qualitative feedback about what's actually happening. Like that's the sacrifice you make on LinkedIn Lives, is that the metrics are not good. Like like it's very hard to trust them. Which that's where, as I start to work in things like we're recording this in Riverside right now,
Yep.
it's going to YouTube and to LinkedIn. Um, Even if I wanted this to come into HubSpot, because I know Riverside said they are working on an integration, it's like the data from LinkedIn is not great. So anybody who's trying to display data
Yep.
is then in a spot like, do you show it the same way you show everything else? Because if it's just YouTube, then all the data is going to be
Right.
great there. So I'm sure a lot of are you running into any of that as because I know a bunch of I'm sure alongside this, we want to see podcast, listens and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
There's kind of like two sides here. So part of it is really network specific, and you know, I can't make LinkedIn metrics better necessarily.
Right.
Um, but there is this like larger theme of wanting to aggregate your metrics, and all of the channels that you're putting your content out. Omni-channel. That's the word that we use for a lot of different things, but it also applies to content. If you're publishing content on YouTube, LinkedIn, if you're later clipping it out and putting those clips also on LinkedIn, also on YouTube, maybe X, Facebook, TikTok, even, like, how do we get all of those metrics so you know just how this episode and all of its children, the clips, are doing? That's sort of like aggregation metric one. The second piece of this is more philosophical, which is, what is the goal of a podcast at the end of the day? Like, um, I think one thing that we know is, especially when you start distributing on social networks and third party networks, that sort of classic job to be done of like generating leads just becomes that much harder because it's not owned media or owned channels at the end of the day. It's not your website. The tracking gets a little bit flakier. Um, and so it's what is the role that podcasts play in a business's marketing strategy? You and I have chatted about this quite a bit. For you, it's building those relationships and growing your network. For others, it's just top of funnel awareness. For some people, they just don't like writing content and they know they need to get their face out there. Yeah, exactly. Like people don't want to be behind a desk on a keyboard. They like chatting with folks. They get energy out of that. There's a lot of different reasons to go into it, and what I will say is, I'm going a bit on a tangent, but like ultimately, when you're doing a podcast, a great goal for a podcast is building awareness and building relationships. Perhaps a flakier or weaker goal at the end of the day is trying to generate leads. Not that it's impossible,
Exactly.
but it's not the best use of your time. So
I was gonna bring it up if you didn't. Yeah, like, and that reminds me. So I wasn't planning on doing this, but I can compare this, and we can talk about it through this lens, like how I've been managing, the shows.
yeah,
If I'm gonna come back here and go to sessions. And this is where, like, you know, you put objects in front of me, I'm gonna figure out ways to use them in ways they were not intended.
of course.
Um, so when Event Happily came out, I did a few shows with Max and understood kind of immediately. And this is where, like, when you think about it at the strategic level, like these shows, especially when they include other people and an audience,
Yep.
like it's an event. It can be considered an event. And if you think about it from that perspective, you can get to some of these other goals that you might not think about. Um, so if we go to, and this is not super updated, I've got that in a different portal. But basically, like the goal of this object, now that we're in the CRM, let's say,
Hmm.
is that I can associate it with the contacts and the other things because so much of Let's Build has been about building relationships and building a network. Um, and like that is something that's very hard to measure.
Yeah.
Uh, but there are ways to connect the dots when you bring it into a platform like HubSpot. How are you guys thinking about, right? So it's easy strategically for me to decide to do this. It's not necessarily the easiest maintenance, management plan of a CRM where I've got to make sure that all these things are associated properly and all that stuff. But from a podcast perspective, how are you thinking about associating it, or how are you guys already associating it to other mechanisms of, reporting and measurement
Yeah,
activity?
absolutely. I mean, you brought up the golden word, reporting. We have built out a reporting tab. We didn't launch with reporting on podcasts back in April of last year, and what we do is exactly what we've been talking about: aggregating the data from the different social networks. networks. So if you have your podcast out on Apple and Spotify and SoundCloud and the almost a dozen different podcast distribution networks, we want to make sure that we're bringing that all in where we can, where we know about the listener and we know their email and we can track them or put them back into your CRM. We will make those ties for you. I think the golden word here is platform. We are built on the reporting platform. All of our events, all of our data are built on the same sort of infrastructure that all reporting is built on. And so that makes it pretty easy to start doing those associations and to start like building those connections between the content and the individuals consuming that content. Now, you're importing a show. So one thing I do need to say, and this isn't unique to HubSpot, it's any podcast hosting tool where you import a show in, you're not going to be able to import that data. That's just an unfortunate consequence with the way that the tech works on the back end. And unfortunately, we're not exceptional in this state. But as you transfer your RSS feed over to HubSpot, we will be able to start pulling in all of those metrics and where possible attribution data.
Okay. Okay. Um, oh, where do we even go from here? Let me take your lead. Get a bunch of
That's
episodes.
poetic about media in general. I'm happy to just talk philosophically. We don't have to focus on HubSpot, but maybe just what is a good media strategy for B2B businesses in the future. One thing that our team is thinking quite a bit about is video in 2025, and we've started to chip away in the last like quarter and this quarter as well, and some of the big video asks. So, example, for those of you who were tuned in to Inbound in 2024, you probably saw that we launched a private beta of Video Remix. So, that is the ability to take a video and convert it into shorter clips. We know that this is a job to be done by everyone. Chris, you've posted your fair share of clips on LinkedIn as well. So, it's something that you're doing. That was just the start, right? Like, we want to get better at that, like, get better at doing the clips, get better at helping you edit the clips. We have a full team dedicated just to that product alone, um, who's thinking about just how we can do everything better. My team, we own the video management, video analytics, as well as video distribution experiences. And so if you're hosting videos on HubSpot, one, if you're watching and you do host your videos on HubSpot, shoot me a LinkedIn message after this because I'd love to know what you love about that experience. But more importantly, I'd love to know what you hate about that experience so we can fix it for you. Um, but
One
that's
question comes
yeah.
to mind, like with the clipping,
Mhm.
um, how does that impact like the video hosting limits?
It doesn't. Well, it depends. So if you're hosting the clips on HubSpot, then yes, it would count against your limit. But if you're posting it on social media like Facebook and LinkedIn, we don't count that against your limit. That is, we're not hosting it for you. So that doesn't come against us. So and you actually hit a good point. The limits are sort of an unnecessarily frictionful experience. And it's something that we are hoping to fix this year. Can't say
Awesome.
more than that, but it's something that we do have our eyes on and are actively spending some calories on.
Okay, great. Because I was always worried about that as soon as, or I anticipated something had to be done if all of a sudden you're giving us this power to just create tons of videos. But it sounds like, so remix, we make a clip, it hits files,
Yep.
and then we use that to do it, to put it on social.
Yep.
And we're not clicking advanced features because we're not worried about tracking, like from a hosting perspective at that point, right?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I would love to hear, uh, as we get close to wrapping, like AI, um, and we're already seeing impacts all over the portal. But beyond like just taking repurposing to really ridiculous efficient levels,
Yep.
how else do you see it playing a role in Content Hub, like specifically?
Oh wow, loaded question. Let me try and break it down. So in Content Hub specifically, our big job to be done is creating content, whether that be a blog, a podcast, a video. And we already know like written content, AI has gotten okay at that. And we know that there are things that we have some unique insight into that we can do to produce better outputs. We started that journey this year with brand voice, and all I'll say is stay tuned for more because we think we can do a better job than your chat.com website. So that's like maybe station one. On the rich media front, one of the big areas where we look to integrate AI is not just like using AI to produce that first draft of content. I think you mentioned earlier with maybe it was when we were prepping that Connor is, looking to use video more as part of his marketing efforts because it's that last piece of human connection. Same with podcasts. Like a lot of people listen to podcasts because they want to build some sort of intimate relationship with the individual that they are tuning in to listen to. And so we don't want to take that away, but we do know there are lots of ways where AI can make the process of between creating that video and getting that video out into ether faster and easier. We've played this playbook with podcasts today. It used to cost $40 to create a transcript of your podcast. You throw that bad boy into HubSpot, and we got a transcript for you in a matter of seconds. So um, that's one example. And then once you get the transcript, well, guess what? AI doesn't really listen or watch videos. So if you want to create a social post or you want to create a blog out of that, what it can do is it can take that transcript and it can use that as the context to generate that blog. We can also use that transcript as a way to take a lot of the busy work out of the whole process. Like, you raised your hand earlier. You don't love sitting behind the keyboard and writing. Can we just do the description for you, generate the keywords for you, do all of that? Philosophically at HubSpot, we've said this time and time again, but we are looking at marketers plus AI, and not just marketers. HubSpot does more than marketing software, but in our Content Hub world, we see AI as a tool that marketers should be using to do their jobs better. And we also live those values within HubSpot. We, as employees, are always using AI to do our jobs better and be more efficient as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now here's a tough one that you can feel free to pass on. Uh,
Okay, pass.
um, uh, objects in
uh,
HubSpot.
yeah,
I mentioned how I was using custom objects to support this kind of activity. We've started seeing things like marketing events and campaigns and lots of not traditional objects, come to the CRM object level so that we can, better tie all this stuff together. When I work with things like blogs and now podcasts, and I see a lot of similarities. Is there any hope of maybe connecting the experiences there, maybe opening up those properties in a way that's like can take advantage of the rest of the infrastructure?
it's an interesting question. It's an interesting question that I will pass on. Maybe stay tuned is what I'll say.
That's fair. Uh, I'll take it. I know it's not easy, and we appreciate like how much it's opened up. Like it never was as open as it is now, and just the ability to. Um, Let me take it there. Like, how do you guys work with like CMS, right?
Yeah.
Like, where's that in the thought process of like, okay, we need content built out as you guys are building podcasts? Was it an easy thing to say, okay, we're going to have a podcast module too, obviously? Or like, when do you think about the experience on page,
Yeah.
like for media like this?
It's a it's a really good question. It's something I think a lot about now since we're looking at video hosting too, excuse me. Um, we do think about the CMS quite a bit. One of the big choices that we made as a business last year when launching Content Hub, and you would have seen with the launch of Content Embed as well, as we realized that not everyone is going to be able to do a website migration and take on what was formerly CMS Hub. And so, yes, we have a first class CMS, and we want to make sure that as you are creating new podcasts, you're seeing that on those modules. But more importantly, we want to make sure that whatever we're building is something that you can take on to your HubSpot hosted website or your WordPress hosted website or your, whatever other CMS you may be using. But in my mind, HubSpot is the one, and we would love for you to be using HubSpot. But In a scenario where that's not the case, we want to make sure that we're extensible enough that you can take that content and distribute it anywhere. And so maybe to answer your original question, how do we think about things with the CMS? It was a no-brainer to create the module because we knew that we wanted to get that onto people's web pages, and we knew we wanted to start tracking events and all of that, good stuff as part of our reporting. Um, so maybe to address your question, it's always important and it's always going to be important. CMS is really where we as Content Hub started. So we're constantly thinking about the web experience.
Awesome. Um, well, I appreciate you joining us today. Is there anything that is top of mind and you're really excited about, uh, either right now or coming down the line that we didn't cover?
There's so much I'm excited about that's coming down the line. Just the constant feedback when I talk to customers is I can't keep up with HubSpot. We're a huge company. We're constantly putting awesome software out into the ether, and there are so many teams that are working on just things I honestly cannot talk about, but things that are going to blow people's minds in the next couple of months. But also, come time for inbound, it's 2025 is going to be a great year. Is all I'll say. So
Awesome. Well, that's super exciting to think about. Uh, but yeah, man, we appreciate you, coming by and walking me through that not challenging at all import a whole pot, 49 episodes. I can't imagine how good it feels good at 49, but if you could do that with like hundreds, that's got to be an amazing feeling. So really cool that you guys could pull that off. And again, like thanks so much for the work that you're doing to improve and advance Content Hub. Sounds like people are starting to take, content creation in general, a little more seriously and get it into the strategy. It's such an important part of, business marketing, but really business growth strategy,
yeah.
like altogether.
And
So
I mean, I think even more than strategy, our co-founder Dharmesh wrote a blog about blogs a while back, but at the end of the day, it's just get started, right? Like there's
yeah,
strategy, but there's just like producing content on the regular. So, if folks want to get started, if they want to talk about podcasts or ways that they might be able to get a great podcast out into the ether, like please, by all means, my LinkedIn is tagged on this post, so shoot me a message afterwards.
yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And that prompts me to read this excerpt that I've done a couple times on the show. I've got this day calendar on my desk based on uh wow, Seth Godin's book um about shipping creative work.
Yeah.
And it's April 30th last year, so I never got past this day. Uh it says, "Did you publish?" They, whoever they is, in this case it's HubSpot, made it easy for you to raise your hand. They made it easy for you to put your words online, your song in the cloud, your building designs, business plans, and videos out in the world. They made it easy for you to be generous, to connect, and to lead. Did you? Maybe today's the day. So that's what I'm looking at every day to make sure I press play and share this stuff with the world. So appreciate you coming by, man.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing that wisdom. I had a great time chatting, and hope to be back on the show shortly with some new cool stuff.
Oh, man, I will definitely take you up on that offer.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris.
Awesome. Have a great day, everybody. Excellent.